Hey everybody, welcome again to this episode of the Game Detectives podcast. Today I'm joined by Travis and Cusack, and we're going to be talking, and Cusack's plushie. Excuse me.
Yes.
You can't see it because I'm too lazy to record a video, but...
It's better that we don't have video.
You should put his face on the video thing, like the picture.
I've already got some plans in mind. Let's just say that.
Okay, then I'll let you go then. I'm sure.
If you take a picture of your plushie, I'll put it in there.
I got a really important point that we need to start off with.
Okay, all right, Travis, we're starting with you.
Cusack, I know, first of all, just for the undoctor, Cusack is actually scientifically proven to be the world's biggest Undertale fan, with multiple dissertations under his belt. But I have heard Cusack on multiple occasions do a flawless Sans Undertale impression. And we'll get to you doing it, but here's my question, because I was thinking about this and preparing my notes. The fact that you can do a flawless Sans impression either means one of two things. Either you were naturally gifted with that ability, or you have spent a lot of time practicing it to yourself.
Travis, you of all people know that I'm a master impressionist, and I try my hardest to learn different kinds of voices. As you remember before, we have a fun little group chat where I will send a random impression. Sometimes it'll be mediocre. Sometimes I'll try really hard on it. But what you say is true. When I'm very much attracted to a certain voice or a certain thing, I very much work hard on that accent. So. My Sans impression is pretty damn good.
Give the audience what they want.
Yeah, let's hear it. Oh, now that I see the video, I see that's how you do it. You do the SpongeBob laugh thing that the guy does.
Tom Kenny is one of my biggest idols when it comes to voice acting, and I definitely love to watch voice actors do their stuff, so there's major inspiration from that for sure.
If they ever do an Undertale anime, you gotta be the voice.
Yes! And can it just be...
It's just the sound, though. You're not saying lines. The lines just appear in the subtitles, and you do that voice.
Will they just repeat, a bit of line of me doing that, or do I have to do that the entire time?
You have to do it the entire time. You need to record 5 hours.
We need authenticity here, don't we? We need some major authenticity, so, yeah. There's no point if we're just going to half, measure it.
Honestly, at this point, the idea of an anime kind of goes well into talking about the first point I want to talk about is that Undertale is like... we were talking before about merch and it's become a surprisingly big cultural phenomenon. And I wondered if we want to talk a little bit about, why it became such a big deal when it did. I think it came out in 2014.
Yeah, 2013, 2014. Okay, 2015.
But, I think there were demos for it that kind of came out and advertised for it in 2014. So I think, people kind of were aware that it was coming to play around that time. Yeah,
Travis had mentioned in our group chat that Toby Fox was already kind of known in specific communities for modding and for
he did Earthbound and Mother 3 mods. Yep. He's famous for the really childish Mother 3 mod where they swear and call each other gay and stuff. It's very bizarre to go look back at.
I'm sold.
Well, what's funny is that if you ever play one of his Earthbound mods, the very famous song from Undertale, Megalovania, actually was featured in that game. But it wasn't as refined as it was in Undertale. But yeah, it's pretty funny because you listen to it and you're like, oh, cool. He was making all this music and then he decided to take something he already made and throw it into the mix of things.
So the question David's kind of posing is, why do we think this became such a phenomenon, or why this particular game? And I think what immediately comes to mind of me is video games are the hardest medium to have the very pretentious phrase auteurship, which is different than authorship for some godforsaken reason. But when you have a Hideo Kojima game like Metal Gear Solid, you have a game that, 80 people worked on and tens of millions, maybe 100 million, lots of money, lots of people went into. That isn't really a Hideo Kojima game. Now, Undertale is a Toby Fox game, and I think that, this wasn't the first, obviously. You could go back to stuff, and we'll probably come back to stuff like the Stanley Parable, but this really broke the mainstream in terms of what, and I know other people did some stuff for it, but this is basically one person composing, programming, putting everything together, and kind of just pushing aside all the rules. There's such a thing right now with video games. It's got to be 80 hours long. It's got to have 1 million hours of side quests. Fallout 4 has to be 10 times the size of the continental United States. But this was one guy that said, I have a story I want to tell. I have a unique gameplay idea. It's only 4 or 5 hours long, but I'm just going to do it. And I think that resonated with a lot of people, just this pure, unadulterated vision. So in that long thing I just said, why do I think Undertale has got to the point it is? I would say vision would be the word I would put. This is a person's idea and voice kind of put plainly. And that's something that's, you see more of it now, but it's more difficult to find in video games than any other medium, I think.
I agree. There is a kind of general consensus in terms of like gaming history that Braid is kind of like the first really indie game like for the computer that became a big deal outside of like its immediate fan group. I would say Undertale represents a new shift in that though, just in terms of how like culturally significant it was. It doesn't feel, like the auteurship is so there. Like if you did not have a clear vision as to the gameplay, to the music, to the story, and how everything interacts together. Like if this game wasn't a tight ship, that was run, then it wouldn't have the kind of impact it would, because even if, somebody liked the game and then shared it with their friends, it wouldn't be played as much if it didn't function as a game and an artistic vision.
I think that the difference between something like this and something like Braid is you could almost call this the postmodernist take on indie, where we're at the point where, again, this kind of starts with Stanley Parable, but you have independent games that are built from the ground up with what an idea of an independent game is. Braid, when you're at that point, it's like we're just trying to make a game on a smaller scale. But you get to these games where the fact that it is a small, singular, independent experience is not only relevant to the story, but also the game. Like it's all intertwined. The fact that it is what it is integral to what it is, which sounds stupid, which it is.
Well, I think when I remember when I was first playing the game, I think I didn't even play it until like 2017. So it was already super hyped, and I think I was like, all right, let's give it a try. And I remember going through it and, every so often being pleasantly surprised. There were so many things in that game, even from the beginning. You start off going to talk with Flowey, and when he betrays you...
Plot twist.
You're like... Yeah, and you're like, oh, dang, this game is going for some edge. Even though... and I think what I really enjoyed about the game was that what made me progress, because I've talked to people who dislike the game and said that sometimes they believe sometimes it can drag. I've noticed people say that, and I think where they're coming from is that maybe it's the crowd that likes guns and swords. I don't know, but I
think that's a pretty big generalization.
Maybe but when you kind of a character who kind of just goes left, right, up, down, and then that's also how the, gameplay works when you're avoiding with your heart, I think maybe that's where people kind of were turned away from it, because they find more excitement when it's fast paced. And I think at times,
if somebody's committed to playing indie pixel game, they can get past that part. I wonder if there's not, because I do think there are sluggish gameplay mechanics, and I do think there are problems with the structure that I could see people being turned off by. if you aren't in it 100%. But I think if you're turning this on and trying it, you're already past the precipice of I only like shooty games, because you wouldn't even pop this in.
Well, and that's the thing, and again, obviously, as you know, this is probably on my, if not my favorite game, on my top 5. You know, I think what really got me to keep progressing was that I knew that if I kept going, something else was gonna, you know, surprise me. And every time it happened, whether it was, you know, a robot singing some sort of Romeo and Juliet thing, or it was, you know, something actually really depressing with subtext. You know, I found myself just, you know, wanting more as I was going. I was like, okay, they really presented something here, and it seems like they're going to stay consistent. I want to keep going. And that ties into the one theme of the game that they like to kind of implement into you is determination. You know, they kind of, you know, they want you to progress and see what is the turnout going to be, you know, if I kind of keep progressing through this world that, and again, there is no sort of preparation for what you're getting into with this game. All you know is that you fall down a hole full of monsters.
Well, I would argue that the vast majority of people going into this game, somebody told them, or they know at some point that you have to play through it multiple times. And you could say that determination aspect plays into that, because you have to be determined to replay segments. But I would argue that, you know, like 75 to 80, unless they played it at the very beginning, would not think that the game... It's the same thing with... Dave, you've been playing Nier Automata, right? It's that same thing with that, where it's just like you have to... The way the game is built, it's very obvious that your first playthrough isn't everything, but at the same time, the game doesn't... I think in Nier Automata, a prompt literally comes up that says, this is not the end, you need to play. It's like it just flat out tells you, because Undertale doesn't make it clear. And I could see in the very beginning somebody playing that and finding it to be a very disappointing experience, and then also being upset that when you're having to play through multiple times, there are large segments of the game that are completely unchanged. We're talking like an hour, 2 hours where nothing is really different. And the game is not mechanically deep enough for some of these parts to really be fun. I noticed that when I was playing Nier Automata, is the different playthroughs are completely different in terms of how you play and in terms of what happens. And I do think Undertale loses a little bit when you're like, oh, I just want to see the ending. Just like, I might as well just watch a YouTube video because I don't want to play. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's what David did.
I mean, if I'm honest, that's what I did when I was too frustrated with the genocide route.
Yeah. So like I did the first route, the only route you can do when you first play it, right? And I tried doing...
Is that the mix, right?
Yeah. And I just... I did as much of, like, the saving I could of like... Or, like, being... I forget what they call the mercy route.
The pacifist route?
Yeah, the pacifist route. I tried doing that as much as possible. And then I realized, like, oh, I can't do the pacifist route the first time around. So then I Googled how to do the pacifist route. Because there are some like special character things you need to do that I didn't necessarily like think about when going through it. So like I knew I had to avoid all the enemies and like mercy them, but when it came to the genocide route, I'm like I could see why like somebody playing it who's really invested in it would find it meaningful to do it that way after playing through like doing the mercy way. For me, it wasn't as fruitful just because like I didn't want to put in the time to kill all of the enemies in every single section and then also do these like extremely difficult battles. For me, that's just not something that I find engaging, and I'm not saying that other people don't. It's just not something I'm interested in. And by the time I think I got to like the
I don't think you beat Undyne.
Yep, that's what it was. I was like as soon as I was facing her, I'm like I don't really...
For the pacifist or the genocide route?
I'm like,
I mean, it's much more difficult, and that's
she's
intentional.
Really hard.
Dave.
She's super hard.
So I'm just like, I can read descriptions of like what happens, and then I'll just watch the ending. And for me, that was fulfilling because I had already done the pacifist route. I could see why other people playing it would find it enjoyable to do it that way. for me, I did find it a bit tedious just because I didn't really want to approach the game that way. I didn't find much meaning in it beyond the story bits.
The structure of the game holds it back? Because if you need like a wiki or a manual or somebody to explain to you how many times you have to beat the game and follow very specific rules to do it, is that bad game design? Even if it's used for a narrative purpose, it still seems like it's so kind of obtuse.
Well, this is part of why I think it's so popular, is that it almost requires there to be a fan community around it in order for people to understand what's going on or how to complete it. And so I'm thinking back to games like Contra, for example, like way back when it's like, if you're going to beat it, you need to know the Konami code. And really the only way you can figure it out is through word of mouth, right? I feel like this is kind of similar in that, like, if you're going to beat this game, you need to communicate and talk with other people, or at least read what they've said about how to clear the game. And that's gameplay wise something that it does, but then that also is character wise and story wise. Like, I think that's part of the meme, like, it's very memeable, and I feel like that ties in with the gameplay well, where it's like, if you're Googling how to play the game, you're also going to be running into all of these fan theories and all. And I'm not saying Toby Fox, like, manipulated the game to construct this entire world where it became popular.
I don't think anybody would want to create this on purpose. I think people like Five Nights at Freddy's, they make these communities and they have trouble sleeping at night.
Yeah, nobody wants...
I will say that this is one of the... As much as I love this game, and as much as I love Steven Universe, they have the most toxic fan bases, and I try my best to distance myself from them.
Those are your two defining personality traits, or that you like Steven Universe and Undertale. So what does that say about you?
I mean, for me, it says this: I can enjoy some quality content without self-destructing myself.
How can you enjoy it without contributing to it?
Define that. What do you mean contributing?
Well, if the community is toxic and you enjoy it, you're part of the community.
So, I will say, I'm part of the community, but am I part of the toxic fan base?
What's your best ship in the game?
Oh yeah, let's see. I would say Sans and Toriel.
Yeah, see, you're part of the problem.
If you don't like furries, go away.
I mean, here's the thing. Am I really part of the problem if I'm not, shoving my opinions and thoughts in front of everybody's face? You're the one who actually asked me and said, hey, tell me what you think about this. So really, I think I'm a lot more tame than what we are describing.
Well, and in case you plebeians don't know.
Just saying.
Hey, in case you plebeians don't know, I'm getting I just got my master's degree in this, and I'm about to get my PhD. So let me just say, I think...
Yeah.
Careful, bro, because I just got my PhD in social stuff, and I'm about to get my doctorate. So
no, I think there's a level of participation in fandoms that people can engage in, right? So Cusack may really like it, but he might not necessarily go to like a convention dressed up as one of the characters. Whereas somebody who likes cosplay, they might have never played the game. They just like the look of one of the characters, right? So there's different ways that people can interact with the game in ways that might not even necessarily mean playing it. And I think that's one of the strengths of the game and why it's so popular is that, again, going back to the clear vision, you have characters that are very like well-defined in the the graphics are well-defined. The characters have a particular vision behind their like physical design and their characterization.
Yeah, great designs. Yep. They have really good silhouettes in it because each character really has one main pose, and you can look at like the 7 main characters and pretty much understand what they're about just by the pose, and then even the just the little voices that they have say a lot. Like even just the I'm glad that it's not voice acted, and I'm glad it's not nothing, because you can kind of understand what characters like Toriel would sound like if they were speaking just by the... It does it much better, I think, than games like Banjo-Kazooie. And I love Banjo-Kazooie, but they're not... They give you burps and farts and stuff to work with. This is a little bit more nuanced, I think.
But I think part of the reason why it's so popular then is not only is it just like constructed well, but it's able to be transferred to an online medium that isn't the game itself. So if you think if you think of things like Fortnite, for example, it's the same way, where like you don't really care about the characters. Well, some people do. But it's like the dance moves, the memes behind it are all very shareable content in ways that like I know what the Fortnite dance move is because I've seen like TikTok cringe videos, but I've played the game once.
Right.
And like literally one playthrough.
The exact same can be said about Undertale for sure.
Yeah, so it's like part of what makes it so popular then is that you're able to kind of engage in the community without actually playing through the game itself. Which,
you know,
like,
I think you made a real.
I was just say it sounds counterintuitive. That idea of like not having to play it, but that's what makes it popular, and that's what makes things popular like Pokemon too, where you don't have to understand how the gameplay works. You don't need to know that Pikachu is an electric type Pokemon and all of its stats in order to understand the iconography behind it.
I think what you said earlier was a really good point when you brought up Contra, because not only is this game aesthetically supposed to be like an older Nintendo game, but this again goes with the two I brought up earlier, which are kind of like the big three in, you know, twisty indies, and I would say Five Nights at Freddy's, which I've actually never played, Doki Doki Literature Club, and this game. There's mystery to it. It kind of reminds me of when I'm a kid trying to beat Zelda with my friend Blaine before the internet was a thing, and we had to try and put pieces together and guess. Because this isn't a big team, it's not heavily advertised, doesn't have all this money in it, there's a lot of things that exist in these games that have question marks. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot of little hidden Easter eggs, and part of that community is coming up with fan theories. You know, the Steven Universe, or Sans is Steven after not surviving.
Oh, no.
There's room to play around with fan theories because so much is left open, and I think that's kind of like its own genre of indie, which is kind of going out of style right now, but just like these twists, these weird elements, these questions. And I wonder if it's almost a little bit dangerous, like you were talking about. It builds these expectations to be constantly surprised and to have constant mysteries. I remember, Cusack, when you were playing through Night in the Woods, you were talking to me and you said, oh, this is okay, but I want something a little bit more, you know, kind of pulled under your feet, like a little bit more surprise. And it's like, I think it's almost a little bit dangerous that these games are becoming so popular, because now there's the expectation of a grand twist, grand lore. There has to be, you know, pages and pages of what this character's dead cousin's life was like. And I think that's an unrealistic expectation.
And perhaps you're right, because I think I'd say Undertale was one of the first indie games I really got myself into, with Celeste being a second one. And then I started investing in a lot more of them, and I kind of discovered that, you know, when you don't have a large budget and when you don't have, the biggest resources as like God of War does, you have to up the ante on your storytelling. You have to up the ante on your characters. You have to up the ante on a lot of things. I like to compare it to 90s cartoons. You know, 90s cartoons were really good in quality, even though some of the animation was kind of crap. But what made them so good was that they had to compensate for that animation. They had to really work extra hard on some of that extra stuff. And I think that's why I really appreciate a game like Undertale, because I felt that the storytelling was phenomenal. I felt that the music was phenomenal. And I felt that when you're able to put that stuff on a simple, pixelized game, it shows that you're I don't know. I feel like limitations actually enforce creativity.
Oh, absolutely. All the most creative things are done under duress. It's when you have the unlimited budget that you have these boring, bland, empty worlds, and you're focusing on making sure the skin pores look good, when you're not focusing on whether or not I enjoy the characters. That's why let's phase out these huge games. Let's have 4 to 6 hour experiences with a lot of love put into them. This should be this shouldn't be the small thing. Indie experiences like this should be just as common as the big boys.
Well, and again, not to hate on Kingdom Hearts 3, but that's the opposite. That's the example of where they put a lot of budget into these in just places that don't need it. Why do we need a whole reanimated cutscene of Frozen's Let It Go to compensate for just terrible dialogue and storytelling? It's just, it doesn't make sense. I mean, how much money went into going into that cutscene?
A lot,
You know?
probably. I will say
Probably.
something you can give Kingdom Hearts. I will never deny that they have vision. It's an atrocious and unpleasant and boring vision, but they love it and they stay. They are uncompromising in their nonsense.
Yeah.
Because, again, like, Toby Fox is from these modding communities and is advertising this game in 2014 and 2015 on YouTube, on Twitch, with, like, people who are popular for playing through games. I feel like I don't want to say it's, like, the ultimate fan game, because it's not, but it also is.
It kind of is. I totally get what you're saying. And again, it's the same thing as
Yeah.
Doki Doki. That guy was the Project M
Yep.
modder, and that game really got popular. I mean, that's kind of the new thing, and I don't even blame him for playing that way, is trying to get streamers and YouTubers to do your game. I think that's a really great way to share what you've made and help get attention. I think some people would consider it to be kind of like manipulative or underhanded, but I don't think it is that way at all. I think it's the perfect way to run this.
Yeah, well, and if you want to talk about manipulative and underhanded, that's what advertising is. So, like, traditional advertising is that way. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I do, and this is part of the research I'm doing, I see so much creativity coming out of mod communities in general. But I think that that idea of, like, having a game that fans can enjoy is also just imbued throughout the experience. And that's the ethos of, like, shareable content. Again, I don't think he meant, like, Sans Undertale to become this huge meme, but it's written in such a way where
There's no way he meant it to be on Smash Bros.
Oh my
There's
god,
no
he bet
way
he
that was his
never
overall
saw
goal.
that coming in a million years.
Oh,
A million
man.
years.
I mean, I was I was kind of like on the fence of, you know what, it would be so cool. There's no way they're gonna do it. There's
I love
no
it.
way. And then sure enough, they made even the fact that it's not a character, but the fact that they made him a skin,
They put the song in.
even
That's
even
what
to
makes
have
it.
him just involved in there, it's just like, wow.
They'll put Tekken
that's
and Mega
crazy.
Man characters in as a costume, but they don't get a song. It's like Sans was above every other, because none of the other Mii costumes before him came with the song. So that was their way of saying, you know what, he's a cut above the rest. That's a powerful message, I think.
Well, I was gonna say, like, because Cuphead got the same sort of praise, and they totally deserve it. Because would Cuphead be considered an indie game?
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah.
two brothers.
Because it's a running gun. I was gonna say, because I think what I really appreciate about giving those guys the spotlight is you're rewarding people for, you know, going above and beyond on a project. And even though it got, like, major praise and such, you know, you're giving those guys praise because they didn't have, you know, a huge budgeted team around them to kind of do things. You know, again, I look at Cuphead and I'm like, how many times did they have to draw in general to get that game done?
yeah.
Oh,
You know what I
everything's
mean?
hand drawn. They hand drew every
that
frame.
is insanely hard work, and honestly, I would rather see them get some sort of acknowledgement from Smash Bros. Than God of War. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
in
really
that
on the God
fashion.
of War train.
Sorry, it's just one that's on my mind. I played it recently. I really like God of War. I don't want it to come off as I hate that game, but that's just an example of what happens when you have a really good budget, a really good story, and you get kind of that stuff in there, you know, with as many people as you can on a project, compared to Undertale and Cuphead, where you only have, you know, limited people working on it.
Yeah.
So, David, here's what I was thinking, too, because you were talking about just the entire, I mean, this immense, almost unprecedented kind of fan reaction community. We know that Toby Fox is working on a project. Maybe it's a sequel, maybe it's a spiritual successor. I don't think it's going to be possible for him to make this project and not have an element of it be the fan response to Undertale. I guarantee you that a huge element of this game is going to be either commenting, criticizing, and some sort of exploration of this, because I mean, it's like what we talked about with
comparing.
Danganronpa, where they're kind of just confused about the. But this is on a whole nother scale. This is 10 times the fandom of Danganronpa, and this is one guy. He's probably overwhelmed and terrified. And maybe I'm projecting, I don't know. But I bet you that is going to be an element of that game, because it seems impossible to continue because I mean, how do you even continue? Your fan expectations have to be. I think it's insane what he's doing. I think it's absolutely insane.
Are you talking about Deltarune, or are you talking
I'm
about
talking
his
about
other
Deltarune.
project with Game Freak? Okay.
The only way that he could approach it, I think, would just be like, fuck it. I'm just gonna.
It's gonna be a burn it to the ground ending.
Yeah.
There's gonna
I thought
be
Game
something.
Detectives was family friendly, David.
The twist is gonna be that you, the player, are Sans. There's gonna be something like that. I guarantee, because it's just too much.
So Sans is Monika, is Travis Schultz.
No.
Oh my god. Yeah, that's
my
a whole. I
God.
mean, just the whole the Matt Pat game theory garbage is its own genre. That man has probably made tens of thousands of dollars on videos about characters, let alone the game itself.
See,
God.
I think people, and this is where that toxic fan base comes in, and this is why I don't want to be associated with it, because people because they were wowed on something, they want to think that there's more things deep that they aren't seeing, and maybe there are. And again, I don't know how big of fans
Cusack,
you
you
guys
wrote
are
a
of Rick and
paper on
Morty.
this show. How can
I
you
think-
criticize people for reading more into it?
No, here's my problem. And it's one of those things where, Travis, I think if I'm correct, you're not a fan of Rick and Morty. I don't know about you, David, but the same can be said about that toxic fan base where people are, they're so invested into theories, they're so invested in connecting things. And sometimes it's to the point where it's like, guys, can it just be a really enjoyable game? Like, can it really just be that simple? And I think that's where I find the separation between me and that fan base. And as much as I don't think there's anything wrong with looking for a deeper meaning, I think that, sometimes a hammer is just a hammer.
Am I
And
right,
people
though,
forget
that you yourself found deeper meaning in this? Like I said, you wrote a paper about this, which would imply that you had
I
a
found
lot.
deeper meaning, but I'm not talking about finding deeper meaning in a game. I'm talking about, searching for any sort of surprising factor and acting like it's deep.
It's a
you know,
difficult
compare-
line, man, because it's like you're saying those people, they went too deep, but I went just deep enough. Like it's kind of
And
muddy.
maybe that's
you see?
hypocritical. Maybe it is. It's just that I think there's a passion that I see sometimes where people, when they see someone disagree with them, they can get hostile. And I've seen that in the community. I've seen it where, and I think maybe it's that hostility I don't want to be associated with.
I was gonna say this kind of ties in with the Deltarune thing. It's kind of like wrestling control over the meaning of it, right? So I think part of it is the idea that how I'm reading something, how I'm interpreting something, and what I see in it is the definitive answer, and is the idea that this person is trying to make. It comes off as very authoritative. It allows you to have control and power over what other people think about it, right? So that approach, I think, is kind of the toxic one, right? Where it's like,
Yes,
where it's like
I agree
how
with that 100%.
how you think about something and how you contribute your own ideas. That's wrong, and I'm correct. That's where it gets really like toxic, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. You have to take a step back. It's just like, at this point, I mean, not that the author's intention is law, but you have to know that when something has gotten this big, the original author has completely lost control over it. Like, there's no...
Look at J.K. Rowling. I mean,
Oh, yeah, that's
That's
a
a-
whole nother thing.
that. I mean, we shouldn't open that can of worms, but I feel that's a good comparison.
Yeah, you just like, well, when you get these intense fandoms, it's like you either have to play into it and go along with it or reject it. I think Toby Fox just basically doesn't comment or do anything, which is the only, I think, approach you can win with, because it's gone
Yep.
in so many different directions that there is no right answer. There's no way to win. You have lost
Yep.
control of your creation. That's just where you're at when it gets this big.
My favorite thing he talked about, because he threw out a letter about Deltarune when it came out. I think and I really liked how he described it. He said, I'm not gonna be able to give you guys the same feelings I did in Undertale. It's just not gonna happen.
I like that a
But
lot.
maybe with this new game and these new ideas I have, I can make you feel something else.
I think that's
And that
really important.
That it is, and I'm like, that's and not gonna lie, I really enjoyed Deltarune. I thought there was
Don't
a lot
say
of good-
anything. I haven't played it yet.
I'll watch my spoilers. But what I'm excited about is that I think he very well knows I can't just replicate what I've made. I need to think of something new in order for it to actually be meaningful.
Yeah, and I run into this a lot in classes I've taken, and then just like talking with other people online and you guys. Fan service is kind of at its worst where it's very shallow, right? So like you can have an Easter egg that maybe like references a previous game in a series, and it's like that's not meant to be super meaningful or like to make. It's just to be like, oh, this is a fun little thing. I think in games and in TV shows and movies where it's like, let's have this scene in Sherlock to make it look like they're gonna kiss, right? But like then it's just a fake out or whatever. I could
like
see the
Sherlock.
same thing
Let's
happen.
not talk bad about it. I like Sherlock.
It's kind of
I do. I really do. Everyone.
It's a good show.
People came out of the bushes like a month ago, and they're like, Sherlock was always bad, right? It's terrible. And I was like, no. Nobody told me. I didn't know. I always liked it.
But what I'm saying is like there are definitely moments you can see it in shows and in games where it's like this was made to like make people feel something, and sometimes that is meant to be like a shallow. It's like comes off as shallow because it's like kind of like Cusack was saying, where it's like I'm gonna make you have that same feeling again, but I'm not actually going to honor what that feeling is. I just want you to have a reaction to it.
Yeah,
Whereas-
that's what the Danganronpa series did so well with, was just kind of not even attempting, not going along with it, but also because if you 100% reject the expectations and just do the opposite, you're still playing into it.
Yeah.
Your only choice is to just ignore and kind of come to a whatever amount of clean slate you can come to.
Yeah, and I like the idea of like this is going to be a different thing. What's smart about that then is, right, you have over the past 5 years, obviously every player who's played the first one is going to be in a different place in general in life and the second one. And that's kind of the problem with fan service, is that you're trying to recapture this moment, this crystallized idea in your mind as to what the ideal response to something is. And then you're trying to insert that into your new product, and it's never going to be exactly the same. It's kind of like being stuck in the past, not just in terms of like your own thoughts and emotions, but also trying to bring everybody else's thoughts and emotions from the past back to it. And that's why it so often ends up just being kind of this shallow, stupid, not very meaningful thing, because all you're doing is trying to recapture something that can't be recaptured anymore.
You can't capture lightning in a bottle twice. You got lucky. Now go do something else. Don't try and do that again, because it's either gonna be exactly the same or it's gonna fail miserably. Neither is fun.
Yeah.
Exactly, I agree.
So Cusack, Travis, I think I mentioned this to Travis before we were talking, but do you think without Sans that Undertale would be as popular as it is? Or do you think like that it would be somewhat similar?
I will say this. I think what makes Undertale, and again, I'll try my best to stay on what you're saying. I think what makes Undertale good is that there's a lot of subtext. And I think Sans is one of those characters that really demonstrates that, but he's not the only one. For example, there are a lot of indications that I jumped my words, that Sans is actually a depressed person. And that he uses humor in order to kind of cope with what's going on, and there's evidence in the game for that. But he's not the only character that does that. For example, Alphys has a lot of really.
I mean, that's not even
undertones
subtext. I mean, she pretty much just like literally.
She straight up
says
tells
that.
you for sure. I mean, even characters like, say Asgore, have some pretty deep stuff that they don't just kind of flat out say. Like his struggle to kind of stay with what Toriel believes is good, and then what he believes is good for his people is kind of there too. And I think Sans, while he has the spotlight on him, a lot of characters really do get shafted, for that. I mean, I think it's still, without Sans, I think there are a lot of really good elements in that story where he's not involved. I mean, I remember the big tone shift for me where I was like, what the heck? Was when you go into the basement of at Alphys's lab.
Yeah.
And you're like, and you discover that there is some other stuff going on that no one has even talked about yet, and when you start interacting with those amalgamites, especially the melting one, you're like, wow, it's not just Sans that's compelling with his subtext.
Yeah, I think Sans gets like the meme boost. I don't think it would be a household name without that, but I think Undertale hits the moment that made the game for me was my first time playing. They do a really good job with like the first hour of the game. It's cute, silly, and fun. Really funny, really charming. But the point where I didn't really understand what was happening, I was fighting Toriel and I accidentally killed her because they purposely don't explain it super well.
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
I tried
I think I know where you're going with this.
reload my save, and obviously it worked. But then Flowey comes and tells you can't erase your mistakes.
He calls you out. The same thing happened to me. And I was
That's
like, whoa.
where the game is what it is. That's the moment that you kind of understand what you're in for. And that's before Sans is even introduced. So I don't think you need him as a character to make this piece as good of a piece that it is. But it wouldn't have been as popular, wouldn't have made as much money, and it wouldn't be the thing that it was without. He's the breakout character. That's why he's in Super Smash Brothers. But that moment right there is brilliantly placed. They don't really give you anything to bite on before that, and that's kind of your first big nibble. And that's what makes the game what it is that moment right there.
I'm so happy to hear that you also experienced that, because I remember when that happened and Flowey kind of calls you out on like, hey, we know what you're doing in this game. You can't just go back and just kind of think that, that it didn't happen. I was just like, oh, dang, the save stuff in this game, it's not the universal save.
A lot of people would be scared here. I think something that points to then that I think is also why I was telling Travis that I think it's very of the time of like the 2014-2015 wave of indie games. The meta-ness of it and the kind of the ghost in the machine aspect of it is also, I think, a huge seller of the game. And you see a lot of games that do very similar things, right? Pony Island has done a very similar thing, but in a different way.
Yeah, it does it in a different way.
Doki could arguably be that
Doki
too.
Doki, Beginner's
It's
Guide.
commenting on something very different, but you can see that it comes from the same place.
Yeah, so it's like finding meaning in the meta-ness of it. Is something that is very popular. I think it might be going away a tad in terms of indie games
because it's hard
now.
to keep that spontaneity, like I said.
Yeah.
Because you get to a point where you start to expect that meta-ness or like that. Because what all these pieces have in common is that they're forcing you to take the medium as part of the story and to kind of question, oh, you like stuff like this, well, what are the real implications of that? And there's only so many times you can do that in a row until you kind of expect it, and if you expect it, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah, I remember for me the biggest thing was that like got me into the mindset of like the meta-ness of it and kind of creeped me out a little bit was when I was facing Flowey like at the very end of my first run, and there if you die the entire game like shuts off, right? So like
you can't lose, I thought.
Well, you can't, but the thing is, it's set up in a way where you can't go after that. You can't go back to previous stuff until you beat Flowey.
Yeah.
So he potentially could keep wiping the floor with you until you actually are able to dodge his stuff.
Yeah. So I was not very good at the game, so I got killed a lot, right? But in that, if you got defeated in every other encounter to that point, if you got defeated, it would take you back to the same screen. But then when you have Flowey coming in, right, the TV face thing freaked me out because that's very meta. And
yeah,
very,
I could
like,
tell. I knew you would get scared by that. That's the kind of thing that would scare you.
I do not like that.
I think the TV face was Toby Fox's face,
Whoa.
too.
I don't like
I
it.
think they confirmed that.
I don't like it. Well,
But that's just a theory.
a game theory.
Game theory.
Speaking of gay theories, David, you sent me a message earlier today that I was sort of confused by. You said something like you were really intrigued or surprised by the amount of just like, I guess, like LGBT type like pairings and couples in this. I wanted you to talk more about that because I really didn't understand what you were getting at.
So what I mean is like so when it first came out in the US context of like in terms of just like LGBTQ representation and there's public opinion too, right? If this game comes out during 2015, we know the overall public opinion about it is generally positive. Generally. So, like, over 50%. You also know that in terms of the stereotypical gamer aesthetic and community, right, they're the typical, quote-unquote, and I'm not saying the actual, I'm saying the typical stereotype is that they're not very accepting of women or, like, LGBTQ people, etc.
See, like Cusack was saying, though, I feel like people in that camp wouldn't play this game
Exactly.
at all.
So, but for me, what then surprises me then is how does it, and I think this goes back to the meme part of it, where you don't have to necessarily know every single little bit of the game to understand it. Mm-hmm. Why it became so popular. Why did it beat, Ocarina of Time on these websites for best game of all time? That's a very fan-centered thing, right? And that would require people outside of the typical communities you would think would enjoy this kind of game. Mm-hmm. So what I meant by that was I'm surprised that the game hasn't gotten more blowback from your typical gamer dude bros because it's so popular. But I think part of that is the aesthetics and the meme and the community quality where it's like you can enjoy portions of it without actually enjoying the game itself. Whereas you couldn't do that with like a Call of Duty kind of game. There you need to like the adrenaline fueled Mountain Dewness of it all.
I think there's two things with that too. I think if you make a good enough game, you can do whatever you want. You can have triple tap dancing lesbians and people don't care. Not that that's a particularly controversial thing, but I think if your music and your game, like if you make a good, if this was like Dear Esther or something that was less interactive, I could see it getting blowback. But I think the consensus is that this is just on a very basic level, kind of a fun game to play, and I think that helps. Number two, if these characters were all humans, it'd be different. There's skeletons and goats. Goats can be gay. Skeletons can be gay. I don't even think a lot of these characters use pronouns because it doesn't really matter. It's like a dinosaur and a fish. I don't think the game focuses on gender identity or anything. The point is that they like each other, which is in some ways you could look at it as progressive, you could look at it as reductive. Either way, I think what it results in is a less threatening atmosphere in terms of like that crowd. Like it feels like less of an impediment on your enjoyment. You're not getting the lesbians in your face. I don't know why I keep going back to that, but you know what I mean.
I think, do you kind of mean in the way where it's like they have it involved in the game and it's not commented on?
No,
You know what I mean?
For me, it's just again going back to the fan thing, right? Where you have your toxic fan communities. One of those toxic fan communities is like very homophobic, for example. So kind of like what Travis was saying, where it's like, the people that would comment on that kind of stuff probably won't play this game anyways, right? Because they're like, "Where's the guns? Want to shoot something?" Right? That's the stereotype of them, right? So if you have gamers that fit into that stereotype and believe in it, they're probably not going to play this game anyways.
Yeah, and I really do genuinely think that the fact that they're not humans is a huge part of that.
Yeah.
Because I've honestly
That's the
never
other thing,
heard
too.
anybody complain about that aspects of this game. But I can imagine almost identical scenarios in other games where maybe there's higher resolution graphics and more humanoid characters, and the relationships would be presented exactly as such and have a lot of complaining. So I think that's... Yeah, I've never heard anybody... I've heard people say they don't like the game for this and that, but never... Which is surprising, because there's almost always somebody upset when two creatures are in love.
Yeah, so it's just surprising to me. Not that I'm saying, like Travis was saying, there's a whole lot of cultural implications of everything we're talking about. But what I mean specifically is just like that stereotypical white male fan response, which I was surprised, like Travis was saying, didn't really become a big narrative in terms of surrounding the game. Whereas you see things like Mass Effect, right? Part of that
Or like
is,
Last of Us. That's all I ever hear
or
about the Last of Us 2 and to be fair, it's a big part of the marketing, but I think the fact that they're very well rendered humans makes people more angry. If that makes sense.
Which comes with its whole other can of worms that we cannot dive into and talk about fully, but
no, and if that was an intentional choice by Toby Fox to make characters skeletons or whatever to kind of lure you in, if that was an intentional choice, it was a very smart one, I think.
Anyway, I was gonna say, maybe we should talk about some gameplay, because I feel like we've been. I was gonna say
nobody plays games anymore. Just watch it on YouTube.
We've talked 50 minutes with a lot of good stuff, but I'm like, ooh, maybe we haven't really talked about the game.
I enjoyed it. I like it. I thought it was fun.
It's engaging.
I loved it.
It was unique.
It's the right level of difficulty. It's not too hard, but it's like there are parts that are incredibly difficult, but if you stick with it's fair in its difficulty.
I will say sometimes I have an issue with turn-based combat as much as I love Pokemon.
It's like the worst turn-based combat game, so your example's horrible.
I'm not. No, would you listen for a second, okay? I'm saying I'm not saying I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I know there are good ones out there, even though I play some. I'm saying that this was probably, and I know I gotta play Persona as well, but I would say this is probably the most fun I've had with a turn-based combat game where
it's because it's not really turn-based combat. That's
no, there's not a lot of sitting around at all.
And it's not. I mean, it is turn-based combat, but then it also isn't, right?
It's intentionally made to not be fun to play it that way.
Yeah, because then you would be doing the genocide route, and yeah. So it is turn-based, and it isn't. I don't know if you want to call them mini games. I don't know if you want to call them quick time events. Part of the point of the game, I think, is to, as nerdy as it sounds, like to collapse everything and be like, there is no such thing as like definitive categories for this kind of gameplay.
No, it's almost like a puzzle game at some points too. It's its own thing, really.
Yeah, which is hard to do. It's hard to do in in video games.
Mm-hmm.
People manage to do it, but it's kind of crazy. I think that's another thing about things like Doki Doki or Pony Island, where it's like you're taking games that have established styles of gameplay and then messing with the gameplay as well, which I think also works with like the ghost in the machine aspect of it too.
Mm-hmm. And having it be one person, if you have kind of a template to start with, it makes it a lot easier to make the game, especially if you're a fan of those types of games, which clearly Toby Fox was.
Yeah.
I think also a thing to mention is, as much as we all agree that the music is really good, I think what really the music does well is when there's ever a tone shift, it does it so well that you kind of forget when you're maybe when you're in the basement of Alphys's place, when it's like kind of dark and scary, you forget that you once were in like a snowy, fun wonderland. You're like, oh wait, that also happened earlier.
Reminds me of Earthbound.
And I totally I believe I actually still need to play Earthbound. That's on my list.
You like it.
I don't know. I think I'd enjoy it, but I really enjoyed that about Undertale was that whenever there was a tone shift, it felt like it was out of nowhere, but it didn't feel out of place.
And that's what I think in terms of like background storytelling, if you want to call it that, or diet. There's a whole lot of terminology in game studies that is not needed. But what I mean is, if you need, in terms of music, you need to have enough variety where you can like provide background music to these different places, but it also needs to feel like it's all cohesive, right? So you need to have music that articulates the difference between different areas, but it also can't be so different that it feels like two soundtracks from completely different games when you. So I'm getting the cue from the director. I'm getting the cue from the Helix mattress representative that we got to go soon. So, what lessons can we take from the game?
There's a lot. Cusack, what do you think?
Let's see. The biggest takeaway I'm taking from this game, and I'm sure on a different day I'd change my mind. Less is more. When it comes to this game, there are so many things that, there isn't flashing lights, but there's a lot of other elements that make them have to compensate for that. And I mentioned that before, when it came to the limitations, how that can kind of really enforce creativity. But that's what's really inspired me about this game, is that you can make something stupendous, with little resources.
Yeah, less is more is definitely, or yeah, you don't have to fit the mold. Trust your vision. Trust your ideas.
Yep.
Less is
I agree.
more.
I'd say that's where I'm sitting at.
This is probably more my approach, because this is what I'm studying in general anyway. I would say that games are more than the game.
Yes.
So I think it's like both easy and it's both like stupid and smart to say that, right? Because obviously like fans exist and yada yada yada. But I think a lot of people, when they're talking about games, like Cusack said, we didn't really talk about the gameplay all that much. We talked about like the cultural impact of it, because that's also an important aspect of video games that isn't really being discussed a lot in terms of...
Yeah, if you want to know if the game is fun, go watch IGN's review of it.
Which is bad anyway, right? But like even at the most popular sites, I guess Game Theorists is like the counterbalance to this, right? But like a lot of sites are like, oh, here's the top 5 like story beats, or here, like whatever. But the reason why I think UNDERTALE is so successful, I would say a lot of games are successful, is because of that fan investment beyond the physical, like how you play the game, how the game story is told. So I would say, in terms of both fans and then also game developers, it's like you need to understand that games themselves are also cultural products that exist beyond just what the game that you order from Steam. It's beyond just the physical code that you get from it.
You have to understand when you're making a game that one day it might be given to the Pope.
Yep.
I would like to reflect that, in case you're listening to this, for some reason you don't know that. Matt Pat did give the Pope a copy of UNDERTALE. We don't have a Steam account, so we don't know if he played it, but it's in the Vatican.
He sent me a dodo code the other day. That was pretty fun. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Game Detectives Podcast. Bye!